Okay, welcome back, fellow human beings. We're still reading Sloterdijk's questions regarding the mobilization of our current time. And we have talked last time about Marx's idea of work sans phrase, work as such, which has an underlying mechanism that, according to Sloterdijk, he didn't recognize, and that is mobility as such. So our whole modernity is just based on the idea of increasing our mobility, and that is also something which is displayed on the surface as capitalism, but its underlying root cause is mobility. And what I always found fascinating in that regard is this fascination with fast cars that I cannot really share. And here we have an instance of a billionaire from the Czech who actually wants to drive a Bugatti on a German Autobahn as fast as he possibly can. And I mean, what's the meaning of it, right? Why does he want to drive it that fast? Well, let's listen to it for a second.
30 a.m. and started our day with prayer to our Heavenly Father as always.
So it's interesting
Then,
that they have a
full
prayer.
of anticipation, again we made our way to the starting point.
So it's not just simply increasing mobility, it's still related to a metaphysical cause. Let's have a prayer that we survive our mobility. God be with us in driving these fast cars on the Autobahn. It's a nice car. You probably can impress a particular kind of woman with it, but I think that's not even the reason here anymore, because they have enough money, so they have to search for something that still gives them meaning, and they decide to do that in driving a car very fast on the German Autobahn. That's the music to listen to on the German Autobahn, right? They'll probably get a copyright strike for such a generic, upbeat, techno music. And there is driving. You can do that too. There's a lot of tourism on the German Autobahn for testing your potential to drive fast.
The top speed mode was activated from the very first ride.
Yeah.
Our
made it.
Anticipation turned into excitement. As we reached top speed, our speedometer was reading 394 kilometers per hour.
So
it
they still want to make it to
but it
400
was great.
kilometers an hour, and they
As we
actually
slowed
made
back
it.
down,
So it's not really the record of the fastest car, it's the record of the fastest car on a German Autobahn. So this is what Sloterdijk is describing. We have this self-movement sans phrase. So forgive me my bad writing on this whiteboard. I just got that, but I try to get better at it. And so then we get to something that he will call kinetic nihilism. So let's look into what that actually means. So let's read the text again. So we have some examples where we see that. We have the reality of modern life by electronics, nuclear technology, computer science, politics with its armed races, mass movements, initiatives from above and below. Everybody participates in that. Rich people, politics, poor people, people in different cities of different social orders. We have also the disarray of love with its urban theater of separation, nightclubs, computer games, and so on and so forth. And even in art, we see that. And he says that it's the will to make yourself similar to this production of speed, self-appropriation of self-production. And he says it's something that can be compared to the will to power, which is a term of Nietzsche. Nothing external, just this vital energy of increasing your speed. But in this case, he calls it kinetic nihilism. And that is a very interesting term because it includes nihilism. And let's have a very brief look what nihilism means. So nihilism is, there's one interesting branch. If you believe that God or a soul is necessary for meaning in life, and if you believe that neither is real, then you are committed to nihilism, to the denial that life can have any meaning. I find that insofar interesting as it shows us that even when we don't believe in God, the concept of God still plays a role, because we say if there's no God, then nothing has a meaning. So it's the honey pot of nihilism that we sometimes eat from. And that's a danger, because suddenly every meaning in the world melts away, and there is an existential threat included in that. And then we start posting memes on Twitter or Facebook. Okay, so this is the kinetic nihilism, and he says there are three tendencies that lead to that. And first, it's the motorization, the installation of autonomous process units and continuous acceleration of them. Then second, a tendency to relieve, numb, and disable the functions of a subject that is too sensitive, slow, and oriented towards truth. So we have to keep that in mind, towards truth as an external meaning. No, you shouldn't orient it towards something that is eternal, rests, and is stable. That is what truth is, right? Truth is never changing, so it doesn't move. No, you should be directed towards something that is just movement in itself, that moves. And we will teach you that at school, at the universities, right? Never rest. The only constant thing that exists is change. You always have to adapt to new situations. And the third element of this mobilization is the progressive eradication of distances and imponderables in coincidence with strategic operation of the other logistics. So what does he mean by this? Well, we see that later, after 1989, after the internet is invented, we eradicate all distance, okay? So the distance between the USA and Germany became very small in my lifetime. When I was a child, it was almost unbelievable that I would one day travel to the United States. It was just too expensive. But planes already made the distance smaller. It was not a Titanic ride anymore. That was maybe even more dangerous than a plane flight. Now it was a term of 8 hours, a question of 8 hours. And the accessibility in terms of money makes everything participating in this dream of tourism and travel to see distant places, because you cannot bear the resting place of your home anymore. You need to move in order to relax. And this process of making distances disappear makes the world as a physical space disappear. The faster we go, the faster we can be at all places in a similar time frame. And the internet is the idea that we make the physical place, the distance, disappear immediately, and we can be at any knowledge node at any second if we want. And he calls this tendency also derealization. That means that reality logically shrinks to the residual function of the not yet mobilized. So reality is just something of somebody who's still at rest and who's not moving yet. And it is interesting that he compares that to the American deconstructionists, because the deconstructionists, they have the idea that there's nothing outside the text, an external referent. There is no truth outside of us. There's just everything with us. And what is deconstructionism? Well, he says it's an equation between kinetics and semiotics. So deconstructionism is related to this kinetics. And for this, we just look at the birth document of semiotics, which was signed by Peirce, and who said, okay, we have an interpreter, and the interpreter uses signs to denote a mind external object. But what is this mind external object? This here, what is it? So the mind external object for us in our mind internal investigation of reality is not accessible. Whenever we say, oh, it is that, it's just another form of text. And that led to a lot of convictions that truth simply does not exist. I grant that the deconstructionists show us a problem, but it doesn't mean that truth does not exist. And this, I think, is a general problem with relativism. While I'm not opposed to relativism, I just think that truth can still be a part of it. But that's another question. So what follows from this deconstructionism? It follows that the Marxists have to see that a critique of capitalism, and in this case of kinetics, is only possible from a post-Marxist position that views dialectical materialism as just a particular faded form of modern mobilization folklore. And it dawns at the new age that the human potential movement is actually wrong. But it's very hard to convince people who require a 3% economic growth rate per annum. I mean, that's a common criticism. What I find very interesting here is that he criticizes the dialectical materialism. And if we think about the method of dialectics, we know that dialectics says there are no stable truths. There is just movement. We will never stop. So here we find another form of kinetics. We commit to the complete being towards movement, and in that sense also the university transforms. It becomes a preschool of mobilization too, where we don't learn about truth anymore. We just learn how to constantly transform ourselves. So we are basically trapped in the death chamber of education, where every day we have to kill a truth of ourselves. The Communist Manifesto, which is a result of modernity, is therefore the Magna Charta of an aggressive nihilism. It says, okay, we have to eliminate everything that is not moving. And it wants to remove resistance that comes from a capitalism. Capitalism in communism is praised insofar as it has demolished and abolished former resting structures of the nobility and released the productive potential. But now we still have a certain solid of power structure that communism just wants to melt into air, and then everyone can participate in the messianic vision of Marx, and that is that the activity of productive selves can work without any resistance. And what they then love are the catastrophe-loving speculations about the connection between the total system collapse and the rising up of the masses. Of course, this is a wrong thought, as Sloterdijk exposes. I think Sloterdijk wants to say, no, the masses, they are not rising, they just become more mobile. And yeah, so that is the situation that we deal with. And what we actually head into also with Marxism is the exponentiation of mobilization. That's also what Cathy Wood always says. We have an exponentiation of mobilization in the tech sector, one S-curve, an exponential growth curve that feeds into another exponential S-curve, as also Ray Kurzweil would point out. But they just all head to an kinetic inferno. So what's the result? Well, Sloterdijk says, in a time when modernity could save itself from itself, subjects too would stop moving as ontological agents of movements towards more movement. They would then know from their changed way of being that they are not the agents of mobilizations, but the guardians of real movement. So he has a vision that somehow by an insight into ourselves, into the rest of a certain kind of truth, which should not be as naive as we had it before, that we can stop the movement and become guardians of a real movement. Well, what will that be? That's the big question. But the whole discussion reminds me a little bit of this scene from GTA, Grand Theft Auto. I never played it. And in GTA, we have a train that is just moving and that cannot be stopped. So people figured that out, and they started to put a lot in the way of this train to see whether they can stop it somehow. But it is just moving, moving, moving. And this is maybe a great metaphor, an unintentional metaphor for all our time, when the train just wins and we just try over and over again with all technology and all arms races and whatever we have to stop that train, but we can't. I don't know what you think about that. Do you think Sloterdijk is right on that? Or do you say, in the manner of Ray Kurzweil, no, we just have to join this kind of movement. We have to be a part of that. And there will be another interesting scene. I mean, here we see even tanks participating in that movement, but then we have like one scene where the driver crashes into a lot of people, and that's also a metaphor for our time. And then they show his face, and he's just driving, right? And that's maybe what our modernity is. So I hope you enjoyed this interaction. If you think that was a good video, then maybe you share it with others, or at least give it a like. If you like to read more Sloterdijk with me together, well, then subscribe to this channel. Hit the bell and all the stuff that I do to manipulate you. And by saying that I manipulate you, I also manipulate you. Anyway, live long and move more and prosper.